Hypertrophy is fascinating, guys. It's the most important element of every single fitness program because everyone wants to look buff like Mr. Watson.
If you want a physique like a shaved gorilla, contact me. Right, I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
Sorry, bigger muscles make you stronger. Just to warn you, I'm in a bit of a combative mood, and I'm ready to be.
I am emotionally prepared because you have the worst argument on the planet.
Okay. Well, worst argument or most scientifically valid?
We will find out over the course of the next few minutes.
Well, I'm pretty sure. I mean, my entire argument today is literally just around, I guess, being super panicked.
I love it. Okay, so very much you.
My whole thought on this. So I looked into a lot of stuff. Like there's a few pieces of research. I don't know if did you read the paper on it was like the percentage of variance that hypertrophy explains of the increases in strength.
I've seen that paper before. Yeah.
I guess coming back to the conclusions from last week, we agreed that for muscles and hypertrophy, there has to be a significant level of mechanical tension.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And mechanical tension means muscles producing a certain amount of force.
Each muscle fiber producing a certain amount of force. Yeah.
For a stimulus threshold to increase muscle hypertrophy. Therefore, it is impossible to generate muscle hypertrophy without generating some, be it linear, be it non-linear, increases in strength. And therefore, a bigger muscle will always be a stronger muscle than the muscle that was smaller.
So that's where you lose me. That final statement. I agree with you to the extent that building muscle will also lead to increases in muscle strength. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that the idea that in order to create hypertrophy, there has to be some level of mechanical tension, therefore muscle fibers are going to be exposed to mechanical work. They're going to have to get used to producing force, and as such, they're going to get stronger. But the last statement that a bigger muscle will automatically be a stronger muscle is one that I disagree with.
Because that's what I said.
That is what I said. That was your fun. We have it on tape.
No.
We have it on tape.
No. What I said was, for a muscle to get bigger,
you said that. No, that was your first statement.
Yeah.
And then the final statement you summarised with was
the bigger muscle will always be bigger.
Will always be stronger than the smaller muscle.
Will always be stronger than the smaller muscle.
Okay, so if we go, right.
So if we just, because obviously you've got some super jacked dudes who aren't as strong as tiny little dudes, but to put muscle on, I don't want to make this the shortest ever episode of our podcast, but
you have to expose yourself to some level of mechanical tension, and therefore you will get stronger.
Yeah, if you're talking, what's not inter-individual, but
intra.
If you're talking intra-individual, bigger muscles always mean stronger muscles. If you're talking inter-individual, completely different ballgame.
You have almost won this argument, haven't you, with your first argument of the day. And that is very, very frustrating. Yes, I agree. I thought you were going to come in and start the argument with something along the lines of, when we look at studies that across populations and we see that that an increase in cross-sectional area leads to there's a positive correlation between an increase in cross-sectional area of muscle mass and strength levels. So I was like, okay, well that's easy to dismiss and argue against. You are right. If you train in a way that creates mechanical work within a muscle, and as such the muscle gets bigger, the muscle will also get stronger. One of the other things that we looked at within that debate last week was the idea that muscles can get bigger in two ways, and that was that you could increase the amount of myofibrillar protein, or the amount of contractile elements within a muscle cell, and in so doing increase muscle size. Which would lead to an increase in strength levels, but there was the alternative route, which was that you would increase the amount of sarcoplasm within a muscle cell, and that increase in sarcoplasm would lead to an increase in muscle size, but that wouldn't necessarily reflect an increase in capacity to create force because you've not increased the number of contractile elements within a muscle cell.
However, the evidence that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy exists in the absence of myofibrillar hypertrophy is limited.
I'd say there are studies. The studies are somewhat limited as well, though. But like you could say that the increase in pump at the end of a session is an example of a muscle being bigger without necessarily being stronger.
That's just a hydrated muscle.
Yeah, it's a hydrated muscle, but that's just an increase in cytoplasm within the muscle fibre. So
True.
yeah, true.
I mean,
I'm really trying to claw this one back, in spite of the fact I was so confident coming into it. I was like, oh, fuck, now I've got to somehow win an argument that he's made impossible for me to win.
through the magic of science.
Let's go. So let's start with a little conversation about what we define as strength. What is strength in your definition?
Strength, in my definition, is just an increase in a muscle's ability to produce force.
A muscle's ability to produce force, or a human's ability to produce force? Is it purely the muscle's ability to create tension, or is it the ability to apply that tension as well, in your opinion?
I would say, I think one is like strength potential, and one is like volitional strength, right? Which is what we see as strength. Like you're trying to produce force.
Mm-hmm.
How much force can you produce if you try? Because obviously,
you can create more force by being zapped by an electrode than you can produce by.
yeah. Have you seen that video?
Where
they're doing squats to failure, and then the guy's got all like the electrodes like attached to him, and
have you seen the
zap
gym
him.
in Bristol that does that?
What?
There's a gym up in Clifton that its entire thing is like you just wear this electrode suit, you go in, you do your gym session, and then they take you to absolute failure, assisted failure with electrical stimulation, and it's like they're like, okay, we only need to train once a week. We will do a full body workout to absolute failure on every single muscle group. You pay us £150 million. People in Clifton obviously can afford £150 million.
That just, I mean, it just doesn't sound fun.
I mean, you probably had the study done where you have your elbows zapped with different, like, just cold exposure and heat exposure, and the fact that you just get an electrode just stuffed in, and then every person who does either a strength conditioning masters or degree or sport and exercise science degree is a chimp at heart that just wants to wear a lab coat and will automatically go, oh, there's an ability here for me to turn this electrical impulse right up to maximum. Oh, Sam's arms exploded, great.
Fantastic.
Oh, that was a brilliant experiment. It's like, oh, this is how far we can push the human body.
Just stabs in the corner.
Never going to shoot again.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and obviously as well, you know, to follow on from that, you've got the examples of, you know, they call it mum strength, and you know, where if your kid's trapped under a car, there's examples of mums like lifting whole cars, like people that don't train, really like doing incredible feats of strength to like save people that they love, or you know, adrenaline, fight or flight, things like that. So I think there's a big distinction to be had, and you know, it kind of to give a teaser for next week kind of leads. Well, not even next week, but for strength in general, you know, I mean, we talk a lot about it being a skill or a physiological adaptation and things like that, and you do have that discrepancy between strength potential and actual strength, because I can only squat 180, but I know that my muscles are capable of 200.
You keep telling yourself your muscles are capable of 200.
You know, if it was as simple as I've got the strength, you know, my contractile ability here, I just want to access that, you'd just be able to access it. But unfortunately, for everyone that wants to be stronger, it doesn't work like that, right?
It doesn't work quite like that, and that kind of leads on to the other arguments around, yes, okay, if you increase muscle size, you're going to increase the amount of contractile elements within the muscle cell, but if you can't then recruit those contractile elements to their maximum, there are other methods by which you can train strength that won't necessarily increase muscle size further, but will lead to improvements in strength output. So if just muscle just muscle hypertrophy alone doesn't explain all strength gains, I don't think we can say that hypertrophy increases strength. Or we can say hypertrophy increases strength, but we can't say that it's the sole factor that increases strength. So we have to look at neural adaptations, we have to look at coordination of movement, we have to look at skill acquisition, we have to look at all of those things. We have to look at our ability to coordinate that strength within a specific environment as well. So when you look at like developing strength for an athletic discipline, what unstable elements are going to be present within that environment, and how will that affect our ability to produce force? How quickly do we need to be able to produce that force in order for that strength to really carry over into sport performance?
Yeah, and that's, I guess that's like the real relevance of the question this week, isn't it? Is, you know, strength is so important for everything,
Yep.
that we do, really. Like, you know, in athletic performance, in like general life, you know, if you're moving boxing and things, like, it's such an important skill. And so understanding, like you say, the relative contributions of different things we can do in the gym to develop strength, and what those are and what they mean, and how applicable they are. You know, like, if your goal is just to be a super jacked freak, but you understand that strength is, you know, really beneficial for health and performance, you're like, how can I maximize being a super jacked freak and still get that strength?
So the other side of this argument kind of comes down to the comparison between the people that go down the route of becoming super jacked freaks, super jacked freaks, and don't necessarily increase strength maximally, versus the individuals that are somehow ridiculously strong in spite of the fact they weigh next to nothing.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at people from the world of Olympic lifting, or like even from
any
weight categorized like powerlifting events,
category underneath super,
they're
all tiny,
and yet they're somehow able to produce insane levels of force without necessarily having developed that same level of muscle hypertrophy. So it is an interesting topic. Like, and as much as you've kind of scuppered it by basically making a winning argument straight away, and I'm slightly by that. We can still get into the conversation around, okay, right, well, if there is some other mechanism by which we can increase strength, whether that's by improving neural adaptations associated with strength training, or by improving skill acquisition and force application and coordination and all of those things, how do we explore that, and how is all of that kind of relevant to development of performance within athletes and within just Gen Pop?
Well, I mean, I look at strength development predominantly from like a coordinative point of view.
Okay.
So, like you said, if you're hypertrophying a muscle, you've got a certain number of myofibrils, fibers, that sort of stuff. You can hypertrophy that, and you can increase the amount of them. But like we talked about last week, which I'm sure that footage will find its way online at some point.
No. Basically, I won a debate last week, and then Matt deleted the end of it, and now we're never going to post it.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, so, you know, your fiber units, they switch on bit by bit depending on what you're doing, where you are. I mean, it's one of the really interesting things, like, you know, when you get a client in and they're like, oh yeah, I'm super hip dominant in my squats, right? Like, they low bar, they've got a very sort of inclined torso angle, and they're squatting basically like in a half RDL position for the entire time, right? And then you elevate their heels, you get them with a more upright torso, and they can't lift shit. Like, they got nothing, despite the fact that, like, but then that to me is a sign that, like, just what's happening, all that's happening, all you need to change, you know, like in 3 weeks, that person that can't lift anything in that will then be able to lift the same they were lifting before, because all you're really trying to do is change the direction of the signal, right? At that point in time, that person is getting, like, all of their muscles going like, right, we're under a bar, we're about to do a squat. Send all the activation to glutes, hips, low back, fucking let's get that, we'll just awake. And we don't really need to bother about the quads, because we don't hit an angle at any point where they really have to do a load of work. Whereas then if you switch it around, the body's like, well, I've got all of this, like, ability to send all these things, I've got this resource, I know I can do it, but now they want me to send it there. And it just takes a little while to kind of shift the neurological, like, signal, I guess, to another bit. And that's kind of how I view strength. It's more like your body deciding where it's going to send the signal and the gravity of that signal. So
hypertrophy primes you to be able to create force, because it increases the amount of total contractile elements you have, so it increases the amount of tension that you can develop within a muscle. And then the nerves impulses and things is going to increase the activation of all of those muscle fibers at once, and increase your ability to synchronize that so that you can create the maximum amount of force within a given moment.
How quickly are you going to switch on the motor units, and how quickly are you going to access the high level motor units that produce the most force? Which actually segues really nicely into, I guess, a little side thread of hypertrophy and strength. We talked last week about biasing slow twitch, fast twitch hypertrophy. You would imagine that if you biased slow twitch fiber hypertrophy through maybe metabolic stress, which is what the research kind of suggests, that kind of hypertrophy would actually lead to lower strength gains, like requisite to the increase in muscle size, than a mechanical tension based one, because the mechanical tension one is more of a type 2 unit hypertrophy, and the type 2 units are the ones that produce the most force and the most, like, engaged with strength
So
training.
the question with that though, so if you end up in a position where you're targeting slow twitch fibers, but you're targeting them with some level of mechanical tension, you're leading to hypertrophy within those fibers. If you're ending up in a position where you're increasing the total number of contractile elements within those fibers, and you're shifting the profile of those slow twitch fibers towards more fast twitch movement patterns, would an increase in fiber size not still correlate well with an increase in muscle strength?
It would, but it would be less than if you. I feel like it would be less than if you were targeting like the other.
The thing with type 2 fibers is that they are more capable of hypertrophy. So if you look at like how slow twitch fibers versus fast twitch fibers react to hypertrophy style training, there will be a greater amount of muscle growth within a fast twitch fiber compared to a slow twitch fiber. But if you're seeing an increase in the number of contractile elements within that muscle fiber, irrespective of whether that's in a slow twitch fiber or a fast twitch fiber, it should correlate with the amount of strength that's able to be produced by that fiber.
Yeah, relative to the fiber, I'm talking like overall. For example, right, the big downsides to BFR, like blood flow restriction stuff, right? The reason that like people get a bit aggressive with people that are like, it's a metabolic stress, it has to be, because look at BFR, low mechanical tension, you still get hypertrophy, is because, yes, you get hypertrophy in that sense, but you don't get the requisite strength increases that you would get with a high load hypertrophy.
So what's your...
So
have you looked at the studies into that and seen what the actual outcome is in terms of...
Yeah, so
terms of muscle fibre density and filament density?
Well, so the study that I'm sort of referring to is the one where they had one group, I can't remember if it was one group or it was like a double blind, I can't remember which one it is, but either way, like they say one group that were BFR, low load, high rep training.
Yep.
One group, no BFR, classic hypertrophy training. End of protocol, both experienced equivalent levels of muscular hypertrophy in terms of like increase in fibre size.
Increase in fibre size, but not necessarily increase in contractile elements. Because that's the thing. I think that's why I'm kind of intrigued by the whole idea of whether or not you can increase fibre size purely from a psychographic perspective. Because one of the things that I think is really interesting about the whole kind of metabolic stress placed on a muscle, like metabolic stress can obviously increase the experienced mechanical tension to an extent within that muscle cell, but then it's also going to put a huge amount of demand on your ability to buffer lactate, to store glycogen, to store other energy substrates like creatine, phosphate, whatever.
Yeah.
If you have an increased storage of those compounds, in order to store those compounds within the muscle cell, you need to have an increase in the amount of fluid that's going to be within those muscle cells to allow that storage. So in my eyes, if you're training down an endurance spectrum and you're creating this really high level of metabolic stress, and as such increasing that storage, a lot of the hypertrophy might be associated with that increase in sarcoplasm level as opposed to an increase in the number of sarcomeres added in parallel.
My understanding from the research is like the reason they can't separate the two is like the methodology for counting muscle fibers is so poor.
Well, I mean, it'd be quite difficult to count them. Like, you'd be bored.
Yeah,
like,
you would be so bored.
Trying to pay someone to just sit there and count contractile elements within a muscle cell.
Mate, I read about people doing this, and it's like this guy counted like 250,000 different things, and you're like,
there was a man put in a room and told to count for a day, and he sat there for like 20 minutes, counted roughly, and was like, cool, yeah, I can just extrapolate that out and that'll be fine. No one's ever counted 250,000 anything. Like, no. even if you had £250,000 in your pocket, you wouldn't count it out.
Coming back to that study about the BFR versus the classic hypertrophy, I feel like there was some element of we looked at fiber size, like figuring out relative muscle hypertrophy, right? I feel like there was. I can't remember. If someone wants to comment and quote it, then go ahead. Fair enough. But the thing that came out of it was the guys that did the classic hypertrophy experienced strength gains alongside their hypertrophy gains, whereas the BFR guys
didn't experience the same degree of strength gains, or didn't experience any strength gains.
I think it just wasn't significant.
Then my next question would come down to okay, right, if that's the case, if we're seeing a reduced increase in strength in the individuals who aren't exposing themselves to a stimulus that's associated with producing maximum force, is it because of the fact they don't have the ability to produce that maximum force, or they don't have the potential strength as you described it earlier? Like, if they've seen that increase in number of contractile elements within their muscle cell, you'd expect them to have that increased capacity to produce force, or do they just not have the skill because of the fact they've not been exposed to that element of the training, whereas the hypertrophy guys have been exposed to that element of the training part?
I would imagine, I mean, having not had access to that group and testing them, I would imagine, to extrapolate it, I would imagine that the group that did BFR, if you took a percentage of their 1RM, they would be able to knock out more reps at a higher percentage of their 1RM than the strength guys would be able to. So I reckon like their strength endurance, like their muscles are able to produce like force. They're not able to like produce more force than they were before, but they're able to continuously produce that force across time, which technically
is an increase
in strength. Sort of. Right,
Yeah.
It depends how you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other guys, the increase in strength was an increase in 1 repetition maximum. Whereas those guys didn't get that 1 repetition.
So that comes, but then that's kind of like in the same way as like if you then looked at how you would create strength within an athlete, you typically build hypertrophy first because of that you want to build a nice solid base. You want to make sure that they're ready and they're primed and they have as much muscle as possible to then teach them to contract all of that muscle. And then you would go into a strength development phase of your training program where you get them closer to near maximum loads and teach them the skill element of strength.
Yeah.
So I would just say, like, if we're seeing the same hypertrophy gains, I'd be really intrigued to see a study where they basically compared both groups, obviously took their 1RMs at baseline, assessed their hypertrophy after following the two distinct plans, and then put them both into a strength-based program and saw what the elevations in maximum strength were at the end of that training program.
So, the study that I mentioned at the start,
Yeah.
the one that looked to explain the percentage of like strength increases that can be explained by hypertrophy. Like what they did was they did 3 weeks of neurological adaptation training prior to the hypertrophy stuff, right? Basically to take out any strength gains from the resistance training. So their whole methodology was these guys are going to do 3 weeks of like heavy stuff, get the neurological adaptations, and then we're going to put them through resistance training and we're going to see how much of the increase in strength from that resistance training then comes from hypertrophy. Because like that would be a really interesting thing, like you say with a BFR. Be like you do it at the end or at the start. I think it would be better at the start because they'd start at a threshold level.
So I'm more thinking like, okay, right, we've primed them both. So that BFR system has increased hypertrophy without necessarily increasing strength, but has that potentiated us to increase strength to the same degree if they then follow a strength cycle for the next 8 weeks.
Okay. So
that's what I'm kind of intrigued by, like, because they might come in. So like you might do 8 weeks of hypertrophy down the two distinct routes, and then at that point, the guys who followed the standard hypertrophy plan have increased strength, but the guys who followed the BFR plan, so blood flow restriction plan, have not increased strength but have increased hypertrophy to the same extent. And then after 8 weeks, how much of that deficit has been like mitigated? Because you could like view it as being quite likely that if you've increased the amount of tissue, contractile tissue, end up in a position where after 8 weeks of strength training you can
actually end up in the same place.
Which I think would be a really interesting study to see.
I mean, so just to flip it and go, like I say, just to look at it from before as well. It would be really interesting if you did the neurological training pre and then did that again, whether or not you'd see a difference in an increase in strength across a cycle from a traditional versus BFR. So if you did your neurological adaptation and then you were like, you guys are going to do classic, you guys are going to do BFR, whether or not the classic would still see an increase in 1RM over and above the BFR, with requisite increases in hypertrophy.
So we say we're going to have to get back into the world of research.
100%.
Okay,
sounds great.
I feel like
if I'm going to get back into the world of research, mate, I want to get back into it for something a little bit more interesting than hypertrophy.
Hypertrophy is fascinating, guys. It's the most important element of every single fitness program because everyone wants to look buff like Mr. Watson.
If you want a physically shaped gorilla, contact me.
It's a lot sexier than it sounds. I've lost my train of thought just thinking about you and a shaved gorilla side by side.
Yeah, I mean, just go to my Instagram, mate. It's all over. It's all over the stories. I chatted with Aaron the other day, and he's like, they call him the white gorilla, and I was like, I'm not sure if I'm offended or like really pleased that you said that.
I feel everybody that you were really pleased that you said that.
Secretly. Yeah. I mean, who was it?
They are the strongest vegans.
One of my good friends who I used to train like way back in the day. I was at a house once and had kids. Their nickname for me was the Gorilla Man. I was really happy. I'm not gonna lie, I was really happy with that. I was like, yeah, I'll take that.
I would love to know the backstory of how that became a nickname. Whether it was something you did in that present moment, or it was something, I don't know. If you've just basically given a bunch of kids like gorilla teddy bears, and then when they call you the Gorilla Man from that point forward, you're like, yeah, it's my nickname. It's because of the fact I'm really strong like a gorilla.
I feel like it's just because I walk around like this the whole time.
You've got, yeah. They had minutes and you were like...
Where were we? Hypertrophy strength.
Oh, God.
I mean, I feel like, again, we've lost and science has won, because, like, the argument that I made at the start, like I said, it's kind of, it's why it's so hard. Like, it's why, I mean, it's the whole reason we're doing this podcast, is to show that, like, while it's so easy to argue both sides of the debate, to pull out, like, all those bits, in reality, it comes down to inter-individual. And it's like, of course, if all you're training for is muscle hypertrophy, and the secondary thing that comes with that is strength, you're going to be weaker than someone who in an equivalent time period trains only for strength and gets some muscle hypertrophy from that, because like the strength in that case is a secondary adaptation. It's like you're hitting the threshold for strength improvement, but you're not exceeding that threshold. You're not like, you know, I mean, fucking hell, man, unless you're a Russian on vitamin S, like you're not going to be able to hit the kind of like volume at and above 80, 85, 90, 95% 1 rep max, while dealing with the metabolic stress, the muscle damage and all that stuff all in one. You just can't, it's not possible. So like clearly, and like again, observational research is the lowest level of research and all that sorts of stuff. But look at a powerlifting competition, look at a weightlifting competition, look at all these small dudes and small girls, well, women, who are lifting ridiculous amounts of weight at much lower body weights, much lower levels of muscle mass than like your majority of your bodybuilders have got. People will point to people like Arnie and people like Ronnie and people like Chris Seabaum and things like that and say, but these guys are so strong, and I'm like, but they're
imagine how much stronger
the level above.
But imagine how much stronger they would be if they trained for strength as well.
Exactly.
If like strength training was a bigger part of their programming, they would have become even stronger. I think it is really interesting because there's feed forward between the two, right? Like each one primes the other. If I increase hypertrophy, then I increase my capacity to produce strength. If I increase strength, I increase my capacity to produce hypertrophy because of the fact. By getting stronger, I can then go into my hypertrophy program with bigger weights, increase mechanical tension, and therefore drive hypertrophy further. So, in an ideal world, you do just want to cycle between the two and just keep on making progress in both. Like, there are going to be times and situations, so people who are part of a weight categorized sport, like boxing or whatever, that increasing weight and increasing hypertrophy aren't going to be the thing that you want to do if you want to then increase maximum force output, because it would push you up into another weight category and then you're getting hit by bigger people. But like if you are just a gen pop individual and you're just training to try and get stronger and more aesthetic, then cycle between the two. Just go long to short, short to long, long to short, short to long, and just undulate.
Sprinkle in some aerobic conditioning to, you know, just every now and then.
But what about the interference effect, man?
Oh.
That's another topic. Another day.
What interference effect? If you disagree, comment.
I'm just going to post that as a little snip on my Instagram.
I mean,
the only thing that makes my Instagram blow up is when I put other people on there anyway. So, yes, no pictures of me have ever been viral, but pictures of other people saying silly things and doing silly things seem to work quite well. So that
sounds like the model. Sounds
perfect.
Yeah. So if you say it now, I'll put you on mine.
And then we'll just see who
gets the most. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. I believe in the interference effect. What do you guys think?
I think it all boils down to, right, what is going to be beneficial for you and your sport and your performance, right? So, like, if you're a rugby player, like, bang the hypertrophy on the upper body and take the requisite strength gains that come from that, but the more muscle you have on the upper body, the more robust you are, the more healthy your shoulders are, the healthy everything is, and, you know, do loads of strength work and take that little bit of hypertrophy that comes with it on your legs, and like that's optimal for your performance.
Yeah.
If you're a boxer, like you say, work on explosive power, work on strength and explosive power to minimize muscle hypertrophy and increase your strength potential.
Probably work on isometric strength more than like actual concentric strength as well.
Exactly.
Because you want to create stiffness, not necessarily strength throughout the full range. And to minimise muscle damage that way and still increase the strength with which you can hit somebody.
Yeah. And if you're in a physique-based sport,
Just do
hypertrophy.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Like, get stuck in, go for the traditional hypertrophy. We know that, like, that mid-range where you're lifting good weights and you're still going to get strong. You're still going to get ridiculously strong. Like we said, like, the best bodybuilders are the strong bodybuilders. You know, they're the guys that do that stuff. Like, yes, you have people who train silly and take a little bit too much vitamin S and just get some nice, big, very unfunctional muscles. But most of the time, the jacked guys are super strong. They're just not as strong as they could be. But that's fine. That's not what they train for.
So, in summary, yes, hypertrophy makes you stronger, but learning the skill of creating maximum force within a muscle as a neural and coordination-based adaptation is going to be essential if you want to maximise force output.
Like I said right at the start, intra-individual, a bigger muscle is always going to be a stronger muscle.
No.
Intra-individual.
Intra-individual, a bigger muscle is always going to be stronger than the prior.
The previous, the muscle it was before.
Yes.
If it gets bigger, it gets stronger.
But then you could increase the strength of that muscle
But then you can
further
increase the strength
by
of that muscle further by then
improving
strengthening.
like neural control.
So essentially, muscle hypertrophy gives you some strength adaptation, but gives you a lot of strength potential. It doesn't increase your maximum force output massively, but it increases your potential for maximum force output a lot.
I hate to do this, but I have to say congratulations, because that was a really well argued case. Considering that I mocked you at the start, I'm impressed.
What can I do?
Well played. You are a finicky fellow.
I'm a connected fella.
Right. Next topic.
Next topic next week, chosen by me. Strength is essential for all athletic performance. All athletic performance.
I love it. Right.
Shall I flip?
You can flip. Heads, you defend. Tails, I defend. Heads, you defend it.
Oh, I get my own question. You get to pick me apart. I love it.
I mean, it's going to be fun.
I'm happy.
It's going to be fun. I'm sure you're happy. I'm interested.
You're interested.
I'm interested. But yeah.
Where, just for the viewers, where do you sit on the? So we can look at it from an entirely different perspective.
I think that a degree of strength is important for all athletic disciplines because you need to be strong enough to meet the demands of your sport.
Okay.
But I do think that at a certain point you can be too strong.
Tune in next week.
Too strong. Too strong is a strong word. Like you can be strong enough is probably the better statement.
Keep the powder dry.
I will.
Keep the powder dry.
already ready to go. I'm still so grumpy and so angry from the fact I just kind of didn't demolish that debate. It's alright. Next week will be better.
Great. They got some fun chats. They got some interesting moments.
They got to find out your nickname amongst children.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But anyway, right, let's sign off. Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And yeah, hopefully
Tune in next week.
Take care.
Bye.